fellow cinephiles. 90s Film Guru here. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'll be reviewing a film that's outside the realm of the movies I usually do on this channel, but that's because I enjoyed the previous two films that this is part of, and I also reviewed those films before I changed the channel to just focus on the 90s. And this is something I want to start doing when I have a film I really want to talk about and really enjoyed. Today I'm reviewing MaXXXine. This is the third film in what has become known as the X trilogy with X and Pearl, and it was once again directed by Ty West. It stars the great Mia Goth, Kevin Bacon, Elizabeth Debicki, Lily Collins, Michelle Monaghan, some really great solid actors. The film once again follows MaXXXine, played by Mia Goth, on her journey to becoming a star. It's 6 years since the events of The Farm that happened in X. MaXXXine finds herself in Hollywood in 1985. She's still working in the adult industry, but after an audition she lands a real movie. Just as things seem to be taking off for her, her past comes back to haunt her. This was one of my most highly anticipated films of the year. I'm a huge fan of X. I thought Pearl was fantastic and was on my top 10 when it came out of that year. And I'm a big fan of Ty West. I've enjoyed all of his films, but there's something about X, Pearl, and now MaXXXine that feels like he's at the height of his filmmaking capabilities, and he delivers so much in this film for me that I was really blown away by it. It really fully and completely delivered for me, and then some. It was even better in a lot of ways than I could have even imagined, and I had such a great time with it. What I like most about this film is it's set in the 80s, it has a slasher element and vibe, and Ty West is very authentic and real to that particular time period. And he reminds me of Robert Eggers in that way, in that he makes whatever film he makes in whatever decade, century, whatever, he makes it real and authentic to that time period. And he delivers so much on that. And that's what I love. It's like, it's set in Hollywood in 1985. The streets and town is kind of gritty and dirty and very real, very lived in. And there's sort of unsettling vibe throughout the film. There's a mystery element to it. You've got the Night Stalker who's sort of in the background, killing young women, and you're not sure if some of the women that are dying are related to do with him or someone else. And there's this really cool mystery element to it. I love the soundtrack. I love the look of the film. It's just really cool and really captures that 1980s feel and look, and feels like a film that really came from there, not a film that was made today. There is a film that I can't really talk about on this video because it's a bit of a spoiler in regards to this film, in regards to MaXXXine, but there is this film that sort of deals with a similar subject matter in the smallest way of what transpires in this movie, especially towards the end. But that film came out in the 70s, but it has the same sort of look and feel, and I kind of like that Ty West takes stuff from other films that came out, or other people that made films during this sort of period and similar types of movies in this genre. And it also felt a lot like something Brian De Palma would have made in the 80s. It has his violence, it has his mystery, it has this sort of Hitchcockian feel. MaXXXine goes to the back lot of this studio, and we get to see the Psycho house and the Bates Motel. And it's sort of such a reference to Psycho in a lot of ways, as well as what De Palma used to do, where he would make films that have felt very Hitchcock, but they were very real and gritty and violent. And film sort of follows in that suit. There's some sequences in it that are kind of eye-opening. There's a sequence where MaXXXine's getting followed by this guy, and what she does in that scene really sets up what is to transpire later, involving a lot of gruesome violence. And it sets the tone for the film and shows how badass she's become since X. But it's really, not only is the look and feel of the film that's really cool and sort of really reminiscent of the 1980s, also the costumes and the performances. Kevin Bacon plays this private eye, it's this southern guy called John Labatt, and he's really great in it. He feels grimy and dirty and sort of feels like those sort of private eyes that you see in movies like this, the sort of sleazy ones. Kind of reminded me a lot of the PI in the Coen brothers' first film, Blood Simple. They felt the same. do anything for money. They don't care who they hurt or what they destroy. They'll go after what they have to, and in order to, solve whatever they've been hired to solve. And he's really great in the film. Every time you see him, you feel a bit unsettled. He looks kind of creepy, and his accent, and he has like sort of silvery caps on his teeth, and just his outfit feels like he's from somewhere completely different. But he's brilliant in it, and I love what he does with the character. And I kind of wish we got a bit more of him. We only get a bit of him, but the bits we do get are great. And all the scenes that character has with MaXXXine are some of the best in the film, in my opinion. Michelle Monaghan and Joe Calavari are great as these detectives trying to catch the Night Stalker and get mixed up in, and ultimately that sort of leads a little bit to MaXXXine and the interaction she has with them. They're great, their performances are great, especially towards the end of the movie. Lily Collins is in a small role. She's great in it though. She is really cool in a little moment, and I love what they do with her. Elizabeth Debicki is fantastic. I was really impressed with her in this film. She's not in a lot of the movie, but she has this presence and this power. She plays this sort of very driven director who's trying to prove herself in the world and wants to take something that's a film within the horror genre that actually has something to say. And she's really cool, and I like what they do with her. She plays Elizabeth Bender. She's just really cool, and the relationship she has with MaXXXine is really good. It's like she feels MaXXXine is similar to her in that they're really both out trying to prove themselves, and she sort of takes her under her wing a little bit. She's a bit harsh and tough on her at times, but it helps her become better, and I like that. Hazley's in it for not a long time, but she's cool in her moment that she has in the film as well. But the whole purpose and reason you come to see this movie, or I did anyway, is Mia Goth. She's fantastic in this film. I think this is one of her best performances, if not her best performance. I think she's great in it. She's super lean and tough and cool. She's badass in this film. She doesn't take people's shit. She puts people in their place. She won't let anything or anyone get in her road to accomplish her goal of becoming a star. And she will do what she has to do, no matter the consequences. She's fantastic. Like, the character's really great. It evolves so much from what we saw in X. And that's due to what happens to the character and the journey she goes on and where she ends up in this film. That she becomes so cool and driven and such a great character. And like I said, MaXXXine and Elizabeth's interaction is really cool as well in the film. But Mia Goth is a powerhouse in my opinion. I really started to take notice of her in the previous film X, but I was aware of her before that, with her roles in Cure for Wellness and Lars von Trier's Nymphomaniac Part 2. She had a little role in that as well. But it was really X that sort of threw her into the limelight for people to take notice of her. And obviously, as in recent times, has worked with Brandon Cronenberg in Infinity Pool, which she's fantastic in. If you haven't seen that, just watch it for her performance. But it's her performance as MaXXXine that really cements her as a really great actress, in my opinion. She's raw. She does things in scenes you don't quite expect, but that's what makes those scenes really great and makes her performance even better. And just MaXXXine's just super cool. I absolutely loved her in this film. So many things and people try and mess with her in this movie, and she just will not fucking stand for it. I love that. Even from an early scene in the film where she's getting stalked, getting followed by this guy who wants to hurt her, and how she unleashes on him and what she does to him is really extraordinary. But it also sets up what is to transpire and unfold as the film goes on, in that there's a gritty violence to the movie and they don't shy away from things. There's this scene within a video store where a guy gets killed. It's so brutal, but it's so great. And when you see characters or people getting stabbed or whatever, the blood looks like paint. And this is what they used to do in the 70s and 80s. The blood used to look very different to what it does now. And I appreciate little tiny things like that Ty West injects into his movies. This film in a lot of ways is for slasher fans and 80s horror movie buffs like myself. There's so much in it, you draw so much from it. Like I mentioned, you know, we go to the Psycho house and there's a sequence where Maxine's looking in the window and she thinks she sees Pearl from X. And then in that moment, I started to really contemplate and realize that I feel Pearl and Bates are kind of similar characters. Yes, Mrs. Bates, before we even get to the opening scene of Psycho, she's already been dead for a long time. But there's just something about that feels similar, and the connection between Psycho and X, and how Ty West sort of puts these things together, litters these things throughout the movies, and it's something I really appreciate in his style and what he does with his particular films that I really love. But yeah, Mia Goth is a standout here, and the third act of the film she's wonderful in, and I really love what they do with her, and just her style is cool. A great sort of slasher heroine in a lot of ways, the final girl if you will, but it's just what she does is so unique and different to all the other final girls we usually see in this genre that makes her a standout for me. Ty West is very skillful what he does to create a film like this, and also Pearl and X that are part of that particular era that they're set in. Like X is set in the 70s and the way they do that, and Pearl is set in a different decade much earlier, and I really like that as well. He's very authentic to that time period or that year that he's looking at, and I love that. I love the use of video cameras in this, and when we see through the video cameras or news reports, it's shot on 4x3 tiny little screens, and the way it's sort of shown to us is really great. There's this really cool little sequence where Maxine, late at night after finishing work at a peep show, she walks through the city. And she walks along the street, and we have this great sort of tracking shot, and we see people doing karate, and we see different things, and then it comes across a whole heap of TVs in this window, and there's a news report about the Night Stalker, and we linger on that. Little moments like that, the way he uses the camera is really cool. It reminds me a lot of not only Hitchcock but also Brian De Palma, and the way he would use the camera to tell the story. I just love the way it's done and filmed. I love the music. Really adds a lot to it, and just the costumes and the way people interact with each other, and the things that are talked about in that time is fantastic. There are a number of sequences that stand out, like I mentioned, the going to see the Psycho house and the Bates Motel on the studio lot is really cool. All the scenes with Maxine and John Labot are really cool. There's a sequence in a nightclub, and before that she's sort of feels like those sort of classic final girls in horror films where she's tying her hair up and she's getting ready for battle, and she puts this makeup across her eyes like she's going into battle, and that's really cool. And this sequence with her at this dance club's great, and what happens to John Labot's character is really cool as well. I like this idea that you see this guy in black, you only don't see his face, you only see his hands, and he reacts to things with his hands. And it sets up this really cool and creepy killer. Now, you're not sure if it's the Night Stalker or someone completely different, but the way they do this, the way they hide it, is definitely something Brian De Palma would do usually in his sort of early films, especially in the 80s, and I appreciated that a lot. It sets up so many great aspects and things to the film. I also like this little scene where she goes to this strip club where she works, and she walks through it, and we see girls dancing, and then there's people doing, filming porn, and then she keeps going through and further into the place. It's like that, reminded me a little bit of that scene in Goodfellas where, Ray Liotta's character is taking his girlfriend into the bowels of the club, and they get a seat. It's kind of like that. And I like that. There's little elements to that. I thought the third act and the ending's really great. I love the opening, which is very similar to how they opened with Pearl and X, where we open on this sort of 4x3 sort of frame. They do the similar thing in this. We're in this sort of hangar in the studio, and the door opens and she walks in, and she's doing an audition, and we meet Elizabeth Debicki's character and this sort of interaction with them, and then she does this really great and wonderful little monologue performance as the character, which is really great. I like when she starts to take charge of things that are happening to her other than being a victim. It makes her really cool and interesting. And I think the third act and the ending's really great. There is something that's revealed in the film about who this guy in black really is. And I picked it just before it was revealed, and at first I was like, oh, I don't know if I like that. But then Ty West made me like it with what transpired and the scenes that followed from that. And I was like, I loved what they did there. At first I was a bit iffy, but afterwards I thought it was great. It is such a fascinating film of a fascinating era, of a fascinating genre. And it really delivers on so much. And if you're a fan of this genre or of Pearl and X, I think you really love this. I know a lot of critics and fans have been bashing this a little bit and haven't enjoyed it as much, don't think it's as good as the previous films. In my opinion, I think it's probably better. It's probably my favourite in this little trilogy. And don't get me wrong, I loved Pearl. I thought Pearl was fantastic because of Mia Goth and just the film itself. And I gave it a high score, which I'm going to give this one. There's just something about this that was really cool. I think it's the idea that this felt like it was really having fun. The actors felt like they're having fun. The director felt like he was having fun. It just felt like a good time. And these are the type of horror films that don't usually make much anymore, where it's all about being smarter than the audience or about giving this really in-depth and creative and original concept. Where I feel like, especially in the 80s and in the 90s, it was about entertainment. Yes, this has a solid and interesting story, which I really like, but it's entertaining, and I think and it has fun with itself, and I think a lot of films forget to do that, especially the horror films of today. I don't know, like some of them are good, don't get me wrong, but I just miss these type of movies that they used to produce and put out. I would probably say this is probably one of the coolest horror films I've seen in quite some time, and that all comes down to the director, Ty West, the writing, and also the performances, especially from Mia Goth as MaXXXine. What a wonderful character with a lot of depth that's haunted by what transpired to her 6 years previous. And I really love that aspect. It makes her a character that's you connect to, even when she's doing things that seem a bit dark or bad, you still really connect and like her and care for her. And that's a skill of an actor, to be able to portray a character like that, and just also the writing of that character. But it's mainly the actor bringing that character to life in their performance. And that's exactly what Mia Goth does here. This is going on my top 10 of the year. Funnily enough, I put it and Bike Riders on my top 10 before I even saw either of those films, and they're definitely staying on it. And at this stage, I might have to say MaXXXine is probably my favourite film of the year so far. We've had some great films like Love Lies Bleeding, Bike Riders, Late Night with the Devil, but there's just something about this that I really connected to. Like I mentioned, I enjoy this genre. I like having fun with it. I had this big smile on my face all the way through. I appreciated everything that Ty West put into the film, all the nods to other movies and the era, and to slasher films in the slasher film genre in itself. There's just so much that I really loved about this movie, and that's why I think it's my favourite film of the year. I'm going to give MaXXXine 5 out of 5. That's how much I love the film, that's how much I endorse it, and I do recommend it if you like the previous films, or you're a fan of Mia Goth, or you like the slasher genre, especially the slasher films that came out in the 80s. I think you'll get a real kick out of this movie. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Letterboxd and Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movie.